I'm Amelia, 32 female. For the last decade, my life has been a series of meticulously planned steps, each one leading to the next logical point on a career trajectory I mapped out in my final year of college. I live in a clean, minimalist apartment in the city center, a place that serves more as a charging station than a home, and I work as a senior data analyst for a major tech firm, Innovate Solutions. My job is to find stories in oceans of numbers, to translate chaos into clarity, and I am very, very good at it. For most of my adult life, my professional success has been the one stable pillar in a life that often felt like it was built on shifting sand, especially when it came to my family. I've always known my family operates on a different frequency. My parents, Eleanor and Richard, and my younger sister, Chloe, communicate in a language of unspoken rules and veiled expectations I never quite mastered. While I was building a career, Chloe was finding herself, as an artist, a journey my parents were all too happy to sponsor, often with my indirect financial assistance. I was the reliable one, the sensible one, the one who could always be counted on for a loan to fix a leaky roof or fund an art gallery deposit. My successes were their bragging rights, but my struggles were my own private burdens. The day of my promotion ceremony was supposed to be a turning point, the one day where my world, not Chloe's, took center stage. I was being promoted to Director of Analytics, a position I had sacrificed nights, weekends, and relationships for. They had promised, with heartfelt sincerity, that they wouldn't miss it for the world. But when the time came, their seats were empty. It was a silent, brutal statement that echoed louder than any applause. But their betrayal set in motion a chain of events they could never have predicted. It led to a moment where the CEO of my company handed me a set of papers that would not only redefine my career, but would sever the toxic financial and emotional ties to my family forever. And by the time the sun set on the most important day of my professional life, their world was the one that was about to be turned upside down. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The morning of the ceremony was a blur of nervous energy and anticipation. I had laid out my outfit the night before, a sharp, navy blue suit that screamed competence and confidence, two things I felt I had earned in spades. I did my hair and makeup with unusual care, wanting to look the part of a newly minted director. As I stood in front of the mirror, I sent a quick text to the family group chat. Ceremony starts at 2 p.m. Can't wait to see you all there. I saved you front row seats? No immediate reply, but that wasn't unusual. My parents were notoriously slow with technology, and Chloe often surfaced sometime afternoon. I told myself not to overthink it. They had confirmed the date and time on at least 3 separate occasions. My mother had even called me the week before to ask what the dress code was, concerned that her lavender dress might not be celebratory enough. My father had joked about preparing a proud parent speech he would deliver to anyone who would listen. They were coming. Of course, they were coming. I arrived at the corporate campus an hour early. The main auditorium was already buzzing with energy. Innovate Solutions didn't do things by halves. Promotion ceremonies for senior leadership were a big deal, complete with catered lunches, networking events, and speeches from the C-suite. It was a way of reinforcing the company's culture of rewarding merit. I greeted colleagues, accepted early congratulations, and tried to quell the fluttering in my stomach. My part in the ceremony was simple: wait for my name to be called, walk on stage, shake the CEO's hand, accept the commemorative plaque, and say a few brief words. The whole thing would take less than 5 minutes, but those 5 minutes were the culmination of 10 years of relentless effort. At 1:45 p.m., I slipped into the auditorium to check on the seats. I had placed 3 little name cards on the chairs in the front row: Mom, Dad, Chloe. They were still there, stark white against the plush red velvet. The seats themselves, however, were conspicuously empty. I scanned the growing crowd, looking for their familiar faces, but saw nothing. A prickle of unease started in the back of my neck. I pulled out my phone and tried calling my mom's cell. It went straight to voicemail. "Hi, you've reached Eleanor. Please leave a message." Strange, she never turned her phone off. I tried my dad, same result, straight to voicemail. Now the unease was morphing into a familiar, heavy feeling of dread. I sent another text, this time more direct. Hey, the ceremony is about to start. Are you guys here? I can't see you. I stared at the screen, watching the three little dots that signified someone was typing appear and then disappear under Chloe's name. Then nothing. The message remained delivered, but unread. The lights in the auditorium began to dim, signaling the start of the event. I had to take my seat with the other promotes near the side of the stage. My heart was pounding now, a frantic, painful rhythm against my ribs. I kept craning my neck to look at the three empty chairs, a gaping hole in the otherwise packed front row. People were starting to notice. I saw a few of my team members glance at the chairs and then at me with expressions of pity. The humiliation was a hot flush that crept up my neck. The ceremony started. The chief operating officer gave the opening remarks, his voice a dull drone in my ears. I wasn't listening. I was replaying the last few weeks in my head. Had I missed something? A hint? A clue that they weren't going to show up? There was nothing, just promises and feigned excitement. Then Mr. Harrison, our CEO, took the stage. He was a formidable man in his 60s, with a reputation for being tough but fair. He commanded the room with an easy authority. He began announcing the promotions one by one. Director of Global Marketing, Senior Vice President of Engineering. With each name, my anxiety grew. Finally, he said my name. And now, for a role that is critical to our future, Director of Analytics. This individual has consistently demonstrated an unparalleled ability to turn raw data into actionable strategy. Her work on the Odyssey project last year not only streamlined our logistics, but also saved this company an estimated $12 million in operational costs. It is my great pleasure to promote Amelia Jensen. The room erupted in applause. For a split second, the sound washed over me, and I felt a surge of pride. But as I stood up and walked toward the stage, my eyes were drawn, as if by a magnet, to the three empty chairs. The pride was instantly replaced by a profound and aching emptiness. I shook Mr. Harrison's hand, my own feeling cold and clammy. I accepted the heavy glass plaque, my smile feeling like a cheap mask. When it was my turn to speak, I kept it brief, thanking my team and my mentors for their support. I didn't mention my family. I couldn't. The lie would have choked me. As I walked off the stage, the applause still ringing in my ears, I expected to return to my seat and wait for the ceremony to end. But Mr. Harrison fell into step beside me, his hand gently guiding my elbow. He didn't lead me back to my seat, but toward a quiet corridor behind the stage. His expression was no longer the beaming, public face of a CEO. It was serious, focused, and surprisingly empathetic. "That was a fine speech, Amelia," he said, his voice low. "But your real work is just beginning." He was holding a sleek, dark blue folder. He pressed it into my hands. "Congratulations on the promotion," he said, and his grip on my hand tightened for a moment, a gesture of solidarity. "But this is what we really need to discuss. Read it. Take your time, my office. End of day." Before I could ask what he meant, he gave me a curt nod and was gone, striding back toward the stage. I stood alone in the quiet corridor, the sounds of the ceremony muffled through the walls, holding a folder that felt heavier than any plaque. The empty chairs were no longer just a disappointment, they were a premonition. Something had shifted, and not just in my career. Back in the sterile quiet of my office, the world outside my floor-to-ceiling window seemed to move on without me. Cars flowed like blood cells through the city's arteries, and people on the streets below scurried along with purpose. Inside, time felt suspended. The heavy glass plaque sat on the corner of my desk, its sharp, etched letters spelling out my new title, Director of Analytics. It was the physical manifestation of a dream I had chased for a decade, yet my attention wasn't on the plaque. It was on the blue folder Mr. Harrison had given me. It lay in the center of my desk like an unexploded ordnance. For a moment, I was too afraid to open it. The ceremony, the empty chairs, the CEO's cryptic words, it all felt surreal, like a fever dream. Was this some kind of mistake? Was he rescinding the promotion? My mind raced through a dozen disastrous scenarios. Taking a deep breath, I finally pulled the folder toward me and opened it. Inside were not termination papers or a formal reprimand. It was a proposal. The first page was a letter from Mr. Harrison himself, congratulating me again on my promotion. He wrote that my performance on the Odyssey project had not just saved the company money, it had caught the attention of the international board. They were planning a major expansion into the Southeast Asian market, starting with a new regional headquarters in Singapore, and they wanted me to lead it. No. To just lead the analytics division, but to build it from the ground up. The proposal detailed a comprehensive plan for Project Gateway, as it was codenamed. The title offered was not director, but Regional Vice President of Data Strategy, a two-step jump up the corporate ladder. The package included a staggering salary, a full relocation package with a generous housing allowance, and significant stock options. It was a career-defining, life-altering opportunity. It was the kind of offer people worked their entire lives for and rarely received. I read through the documents 3 times, the words blurring together. Singapore, a new life, a clean slate. It was an incredible, dizzying prospect. But as I processed the sheer magnitude of the offer, my phone, which had been on silent, vibrated on the desk. I glanced at the screen, my heart giving a painful lurch. It was a notification from Instagram. Chloe had tagged me in a post. With trembling fingers, I tapped the notification. The app opened to a photograph that ripped the air from my lungs. There they were, my mother, my father, and my sister, Chloe. They were standing on the sun-drenched deck of a massive cruise ship, the brilliant blue of the ocean stretching out behind them. They were all grinning, holding colorful, umbrella-adorned cocktails. Chloe was in the center, wearing a flowing sundress and oversized sunglasses, looking like the star of her own movie. My parents flanked her, their arms wrapped around her, their faces beaming with a carefree joy I hadn't seen in years. The caption was a little dagger. Surprise family vacay, ship sun, sometimes you just gotta get away and put family first. Soaking up the sun in the Caribbean, love my amazing parents for making this happen. It was punctuated with a string of emojis, a ship, a sun, a palm tree, a heart, and then the hashtag family first. The post had been uploaded 2 hours ago, right in the middle of my promotion ceremony. They weren't in an emergency. They hadn't gotten into an accident. They were on a cruise. They had chosen this, a surprise vacation, over being there for me on the most important day of my career. The lie was so blatant, so cruel, it was breathtaking. My mother's concern over her lavender dress, my father's joke about his speech, it was all a performance. A meticulously crafted deception to keep me in the dark until it was too late. A wave of nausea washed over me, followed by an unnerving, icy calm. The familiar sting of disappointment, the dull ache of being second best, was suddenly gone. In its place was a profound, chilling clarity. This wasn't just neglect. This wasn't a simple case of forgetfulness or mixed priorities. This was a deliberate, calculated act of disrespect. They didn't just forget me. They actively erased me from an event they deemed more important, one that, judging by the hashtag, was meant to reinforce their tight little circle of 3. Family first. The hypocrisy was so profound it was almost absurd. For my entire life, family first had been their mantra, a phrase they used to guilt me into canceling plans, lending money I couldn't spare, and putting my own needs on the back burner to cater to Chloe's latest whim. Now, they were using it as a caption on a photo that documented their ultimate betrayal. I stared at the picture, my data analyst brain kicking into gear, overriding the emotional storm. I started noticing the details. The logo on their cocktail glasses belonged to a notoriously expensive cruise line. The trip must have cost a small fortune. Where did they get the money? My parents lived on a modest retirement income. Chloe's job as a gallery assistant barely covered her rent, or so they claimed. My mind immediately flashed to 3 weeks prior. My father had called me in a panic. The roof on their condo had a catastrophic leak, and the homeowners association wasn't covering the full cost. He'd sounded so stressed, so helpless. I, of course, had transferred $10,000 without a second thought. "Whatever you need, Dad," I said. "Family first." The pieces clicked into place with a sickening finality. There was no leaky roof. The money wasn't for a repair, it was for a luxury cruise. My hard-earned money, the money I'd made working 60-hour weeks, had funded their tropical getaway. It had paid for the cocktails they were holding in that picture. I hadn't just been forgotten, I had been used. I was the family bank, the reliable utility, the funding source for the lifestyle they curated around my sister, the golden child. My promotion wasn't an event for them to celebrate. It was just another data point confirming their investment in me was paying dividends. I looked from the smiling photo on my phone to the life-changing offer in the blue folder. Singapore, 10,000 miles away from them. For the first time all day, a real, genuine smile touched my lips. It wasn't a happy smile. It was the smile of a strategist who had just seen the entire chessboard. They thought they had put me in my place. They had no idea they had just set me free. The drive home from the office was strangely serene. The usual gridlock traffic didn't bother me. The blaring horns and the city's cacophony felt distant, like the soundtrack to someone else's life. My own world had become laser-focused. The rage and hurt that should have been consuming me had instead crystallized into a cold, hard resolve. When I walked into my apartment, I didn't turn on the lights or the television. I walked straight to the closet in my home office and pulled out a large, plastic storage container labeled Finances. Inside were years of my life, meticulously documented: bank statements, credit card bills, tax returns, and a series of worn-out notebooks. Since my first real job, I'd been a compulsive record keeper. It was a habit born from my profession, a belief that you couldn't manage what you didn't measure. I had tracked every dollar, every investment, every expense. Now, for the first time, I was going to apply that same ruthless scrutiny to the one account I had always left unbalanced, the one labeled family. I spread the contents of the box across my large dining room table, turning it into a forensic accounting workstation. I started with the most recent transaction, the $10,000 for the leaky roof. I found the bank transfer confirmation and printed it out. Then I went further back. I found the $5,000 I'd sent 6 months ago for my parents' emergency dental work, which I now realized coincided perfectly with Chloe's week-long trip to Miami for Art Basel. I found the wire transfer for $25,000 from 2 years ago. That was for the down payment on my parents' retirement condo. They had sold my childhood home and told me they were still short on the new place. They'd been so convincing, so full of gratitude. "You're a lifesaver, Amelia," my mother had cried over the phone. "We couldn't have done this without you. This condo is as much yours as it is ours." I had felt a warm glow of pride, believing I was helping secure my parents' future. As I dug deeper, the scale of my unwitting generosity was staggering. It wasn't just the big, memorable amounts. It was a constant, draining stream of smaller expenses that I had been conditioned to absorb without question. There were the monthly top-ups to Chloe's art supplies fund, which I now suspected was her brunch and cocktail budget. There were the countless times I'd paid for her car insurance, her phone bill, her essential trips to Europe to find inspiration. Every request was framed as a crisis, a desperate need that only I, the responsible daughter with the stable job, could solve. "Chloe is a struggling artist, Amelia," my mother would say, her voice laced with disappointment if I ever hesitated. "It's a different path. We have to support her dreams." My dreams, apparently, were self-supporting. I worked through the night, fueled by black coffee and a growing sense of righteous fury. I created a new spreadsheet, my fingers flying across the keyboard with practiced efficiency. I created columns for date, amount, recipient, and stated purpose. Then I added a fifth column, actual purpose. I opened Chloe's social media profiles, which were blessedly public, and began the painstaking work of cross-referencing. The emergency vet bill for my parents' cat coincided with photos of Chloe at a music festival. The urgent furnace replacement, money aligned with a series of posts from a luxury spa retreat. The money I'd loaned for a security deposit on a new art studio was transferred just 2 days before Chloe posted a picture of a new designer handbag, captioned, "Treat yourself." It was a systematic, decade-long deception. They weren't just bad with money, they were con artists, and I was their mark. I was their secret, inexhaustible source of funding for a lifestyle they couldn't afford and a daughter they prioritized above all else. I wasn't a cherished family member, I was a resource to be exploited. The more I uncovered, the less I felt. The emotional pain was being cauterized by the cold, hard data. The numbers didn't lie. The spreadsheet grew longer and longer, a digital testament to my own blindness. By 4 a.m., I had a final tally. I highlighted the cell, my breath catching in my throat as I read the number. Over the past 10 years, I had given my family a documented, verifiable total of $287,000. It was a staggering sum. It was the down payment on a beautiful house in a nice neighborhood. It was a fully funded retirement account. It was a life of financial freedom that I had handed over, piece by piece, in the name of family. The worst part was the realization that it was never going to stop. As long as I was willing to give, they would be willing to take. My promotion, my new salary, to them, it wouldn't mean my success. It would mean the bank was getting a new infusion of cash. The cruise wasn't a one-time betrayal. It was a symptom of a terminal disease. I had been trying to earn their love and respect through achievement and generosity, but I was playing a game with rules I never understood. The only way to win was to refuse to play. I sat back in my chair, the first rays of dawn beginning to streak the sky. The anger had subsided, leaving behind a hard, immutable core of resolve. I wasn't just going to move to Singapore and cut them off. That felt too passive, too easy. They would simply paint me as the villain, the ungrateful daughter who abandoned her family for a job. No, they needed to understand the consequences of their actions. They needed to see the receipts, not just the financial ones, but the emotional ones too. They needed to be held accountable. I looked at the spreadsheet, its neat columns and bolded total a reflection of my own analytical mind. I had built a career on finding the truth in data. Now, I would use that same skill to reclaim my life. The blue folder from Mr. Harrison was still on the table. It was my escape route, but now I saw it was also something else. It was a weapon, and I was finally ready to use it. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in controlled efficiency. I took 2 personal days from work, citing a family matter, a bitter irony that was not lost on me. I didn't waste a moment on grief or self-pity. That could come later. For now, I had a mission. My apartment transformed from a crime scene of financial forensics into a strategic command center. My first step was to move beyond my own records and seek external validation. I needed irrefutable proof, a case so airtight that even my mother, a master of emotional manipulation, couldn't wriggle her way out of it. My target was the biggest and most painful lie of all, the sale of my childhood home. They had told me the story 2 years ago, their faces a perfect mask of sorrow. The market was down, the upkeep was too much, they needed the capital to secure their retirement. I had mourned the loss of that house more than I let on. It was the repository of every happy memory I had from my youth, learning to ride a bike in the driveway, Christmases by the fireplace, the pencil marks on the kitchen doorframe tracking my height. They had assured me the decision broke their hearts. I now suspected their hearts were in perfect working order. I started with a public property records search online. I typed in the address of my old home, and the current ownership information populated the screen. My breath hitched. The house hadn't been sold to a stranger. It had been transferred via a quitclaim deed. The owner was listed not as an individual, but as the Aliner and Richard Jensen Family Trust. A trust that was sophisticated. It suggested planning and likely legal advice. My mind immediately went to their golfing buddy, a semi-retired estate lawyer named Gary. I felt a chill run down my spine. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision. This was a calculated, long-term strategy, but a trust on its own didn't tell me everything. I needed to know the terms. I needed to know the beneficiary. Getting access to the private documents of a trust is nearly impossible without legal cause, but I was a data analyst. My job was to find needles in digital haystacks. I spent the next several hours using every legal, open-source intelligence trick I knew. I searched county clerk websites, legal filing databases, and notary public records. I finally found what I was looking for, not in the trust documents themselves, but in a related filing for a home equity line of credit they had taken out against the property 6 months after creating the trust. And attached to that application, as a supporting document, was the trust's certificate of existence. My hands were shaking as I downloaded the PDF. I scrolled through the legalese until I found the section on beneficiaries, and there it was in stark black and white. Upon the passing of both grantors, Elinor and Richard Jensen, the sole beneficiary of the trust, and by extension, the sole inheritor of the house and all its contents, was listed as our beloved daughter, Chloe Jensen. My name was nowhere. I wasn't just excluded, I was erased. They hadn't just sold my childhood home out from under me. They had given it to my sister and made me help pay for the condo that allowed them to do it. The $25,000 I had given them for their down payment was, in reality, seed money for their new life, a life where their assets were neatly funneled to their favored child, while their other child was kept on as the family workhorse. The sheer, breathtaking audacity of it almost made me laugh. It was a perfect, long-running con. I was the financial engine, and Chloe was the sole passenger. I printed out the trust certificate and the HELOC application, the paper warm from the printer. This was my smoking gun. This was the proof that their deception went far beyond a few borrowed sums for vacations. This was a systematic disinheritance, a fundamental betrayal of what it means to be a family. It was a declaration that, in their eyes, I was not an equal. I was a tool. With this evidence in hand, the spreadsheet I had created took on a new, more powerful significance. It was no longer just a personal accounting of my grievances. It was a professional-grade audit of their moral and financial bankruptcy. I spent the rest of the day refining it, adding a new tab titled Asset Misappropriation. I embedded the property records, the trust certificate, and screenshots of Chloe's lavish expenditures, complete with timestamps that aligned with my financial transfers. I created charts and graphs, visualizing the flow of money from my bank account into their lifestyle. The final document was more than a spreadsheet, it was a dossier. It was a cold, logical, and irrefutable narrative of their long-term exploitation. When I was finished, I exported it as a password-protected PDF. I named the file the Jensen Family Audit. I leaned back, the exhaustion finally hitting me like a physical blow. But beneath the fatigue was a feeling of empowerment. I finally understood the full scope of their deception. I had quantified their betrayal. I had translated years of emotional manipulation into the one language they would be forced to understand: the language of numbers, assets, and legal consequences. They had always underestimated me, seeing me as the dutiful, quiet, and slightly naive daughter who was good with computers. They had no idea that the very skills they had profited from were the ones I would now use to dismantle their carefully constructed world. I looked again at the offer for the Singapore position. It was my future, but before I could step into it, I had to close the books on my past. And the Jensen Family Audit was the final invoice. The following Monday morning, I walked into Mr. Harrison's office with a newfound sense of purpose. The past 2 days had been a crucible, burning away the last vestiges of my childish hope that my family could change. I was no longer the hurt daughter. I was the director of analytics, and I was there to discuss a business proposal. Mr. Harrison greeted me with a nod, gesturing for me to sit. His office was large and impeccably organized, with a panoramic view of the city I had worked so hard to conquer. He didn't waste time with small talk. "Amelia," he began, his eyes sharp and perceptive, "you've had the weekend to review Project Gateway. What are your thoughts?" "It's an incredible opportunity, sir," I said, my voice steady and clear. "It's the challenge of a lifetime. I'm honored to be considered. I accept." A rare smile touched his lips. "I thought you might say that. You have the skills, and frankly, you have the grit. We need someone who can build a team from scratch and navigate the complexities of a new market. I have no doubt that person is you." He paused, his expression turning more serious. "However, there is the matter of the relocation contract. The family financial guarantee clause. As I mentioned in my note, it's a bit of an old-world formality from our company's founding, meant to ensure our top-level international placements are stable. Given the substantial investment, the board likes to see deep roots. He leaned forward slightly. And as I also mentioned, given your unique value to this company, I have the authority to waive it. I just need you to say the word. This was the moment, the easy way out. I could say yes, sign a clean contract, and be on a plane to Singapore in a month, leaving my family and their mess behind. But that would mean leaving the score unsettled. It would mean they would face no consequences for their decades of deception. It would mean the $287,000, the family home, the lies, it would all be written off as a bad debt. And I was no longer in the business of writing off bad debts. "Thank you for the offer, Mr. Harrison," I said carefully. "I appreciate your willingness to make an exception. However, I don't think it will be necessary. My family will be more than happy to co-sign." He raised an eyebrow, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. He was a smart man. He had clearly suspected something was amiss when my family failed to show up at the ceremony. My file likely contained my emergency contact information, and he knew I wasn't married and had no children. My parents and sister were my only next of kin. "Are you certain, Amelia?" he asked, his tone neutral but his gaze searching. "International contracts can be complex. You wouldn't want to entangle them unnecessarily." "I'm certain," I replied, my voice firm. "They've always been my biggest supporters. They will see this as a family achievement. In fact, they would be insulted if I cut them out of it." The words tasted lick. Ash in my mouth, but I delivered them with a convincing smile. I was leveraging their own narrative of the close, supportive family against them. I then made my move. "There is one small thing, though," I added casually. "I was reviewing the standard contract with my personal lawyer over the weekend. A lie, of course, but a necessary one. He drafted a small addendum, mostly for personal liability and tax purposes here in the States. It clarifies the co-signatory role as a guarantor of my professional performance rather than a financial backer, and it outlines some terms for a personal loan repayment I have with them, just to keep everything clean and documented now that I'll be an expatriate. It's a simple formality. Would it be possible to attach this addendum to the official contract before I send it to them for their signature?" I held my breath. This was the crux of my plan. The addendum was a Trojan horse. My lawyer, which was actually me, using a legal template service and the cold, hard language of my dossier, had drafted a document that was anything but simple. Buried in the dense legalese of tax code references and liability clauses was a paragraph that was a masterpiece of deception. It stated that by signing as guarantors, the co-signatories, Alina and Richard Jensen, formally acknowledged a personal debt to Amelia Jensen in the sum of $287,000. It further stipulated that, as a gesture of good faith for this high-level international placement, they agreed to place liens against two key assets: their condo and the property held by the Alina and Richard Jensen Family Trust, as collateral for the aforementioned debt, with a repayment schedule to be determined upon Amelia's successful relocation. It was a legally binding confession and a contract for repayment, all disguised as a bureaucratic formality. Mr. Harrison looked at me for a long moment. I didn't flinch. I met his gaze with the unwavering confidence of a senior executive. I wasn't asking for his help in my revenge. I was simply following corporate procedure. Whether he saw through it or not, I couldn't be sure. But he had championed my career because I was ruthless with data and strategy. Perhaps he recognized and respected that I was applying the same principles to my own life. Finally, he gave a slow nod. "Our legal department will have to review it, of course," he said. "But if your lawyer says it's standard procedure, I don't foresee a problem. Send the addendum to my assistant. We'll have a finalized contract ready for you by tomorrow." I thanked him, shook his hand, and walked out of his office, my heart hammering against my ribs. The trap was set. Now, all I had to do was wait for the targets to walk into it. They would be back from their cruise in 2 days. They would be tan, relaxed, and completely oblivious. And they would be so blinded by the prestige and the dollar signs of a vice president title in the family that they would sign anything I put in front of them. It was an offer they would think was too good to refuse. They had no idea it was one they would regret for the rest of their lives. The email was a work of art, a carefully constructed fiction designed to appeal to their deepest vanities. I sent it on Wednesday afternoon, timing it for when I knew their ship would be docked back in Miami and they'd be turning on their phones for the first time in a week. The subject line was simple and enticing: incredible news for our family. I kept the tone of the email breezy and ecstatic, channeling a version of myself they wanted to believe in, the successful but still family-oriented daughter. I wrote about my surprise promotion, framing the Singapore offer not as my achievement, but as a victory for all of us. "I know how much you've all sacrificed to help me get here," I wrote, the sentence dripping with an irony so thick I could taste it. "And this new role as a vice president is a testament to the foundation you built for me. The company sees us as a strong, stable family unit, which is why they have this old-fashioned policy of needing a parental signature on the contract. It's a formality, of course, but I think it's a beautiful symbol of how my success is really our success." I attached the finalized contract, a multi-page PDF that included the company's official offer letter and, buried deep within the supplementary pages, my poison pill addendum. I made sure to highlight the new salary and the title of Regional Vice President in bold. I knew they wouldn't read the dense legal jargon. They would see the numbers, see the title they could brag about to their friends, and their greed would do the rest. I ended the email with a call to action designed to create a sense of urgency and importance. "I need the signed papers back as soon as possible to secure the offer. They accept digital signatures. I can't wait to celebrate with you all when you get home. Love, Amelia." Then I waited. For the first few hours, there was only silence. I could picture the scene perfectly, them getting off the ship, exhausted and sun-drenched, checking their phones and seeing my email. I imagined the flicker of guilt at having missed my ceremony being instantly extinguished by the dazzling news of my promotion. I imagined my mother reading the email aloud, her voice filled with pride and, more importantly, a sense of vindication. Their investment in Chloe was for love, their investment in me was for ROI, and the returns were finally in. At 6:17 p.m., my phone pinged. It was an email from a document signing service. "Your document has been signed." I clicked the link, and there it was. The contract, complete with the scrawled, legally binding digital signatures of Alina Jensen and Richard Jensen. They had walked right into the trap without a moment's hesitation. A cold, triumphant calm washed over me. Phase 1 was complete. I immediately forwarded the signed contract to a lawyer I had hired that morning, a sharp, no-nonsense woman who specialized in financial litigation. I had already briefed her on the situation and provided her with the Jensen family audit. Her instructions were clear. The moment the contract was signed, she was to execute Phase 2. At 7:00 p.m. on the dot, she acted. A registered letter containing the full contract, with the debt acknowledgement addendum highlighted and explained in plain English, was dispatched to my parents' condo. Simultaneously, she sent a comprehensive email to my parents and Chloe. The email included the signed contract, the full Jensen family audit, PDF, and a formal letter of demand. The letter stated that, per the legally binding contract they had just signed, they had formally acknowledged a debt of $287,000 to me. It informed them that, as per the same contract, liens were being filed against their condo and the assets of the family trust. It concluded by stating that any attempt to challenge the contract or move assets would be met with immediate legal action for fraud and breach of contract. I turned my phone's ringer on and set it on the coffee table. I poured myself a glass of wine and sat on the sofa, watching the phone as if it were a cobra. The first call came at 7:09 p.m. It was my mother. The caller ID picture showed her smiling sweetly. I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 10 seconds later, she called again. I ignored it again. Then came a text. "Amelia, call me immediately. There is some mistake with this email." I didn't reply. My father's number flashed on the screen. I let it go to voicemail. Then Chloe. Then my mother again. The calls started coming faster, a frantic, overlapping barrage of panic. They were realizing in real time the magnitude of what they had done. The phone buzzed and lit up incessantly, a constant beacon of their dawning horror. For the first time in my life, I was in complete control. Their desperation was a tangible thing, a storm raging somewhere out there while I sat in the calm, quiet eye of it. I didn't listen to the voicemails. I didn't need to. I could imagine their content, confusion turning to outrage, then to pleading, then to threats. I let them exhaust themselves. For hours, the phone was relentless. I watched a movie, cooked dinner, and tried to read a book, the constant buzzing a background score to my newfound peace. It was the sound of my chains breaking. As the evening wore on, the calls became less frequent, replaced by a torrent of text messages. Long, rambling paragraphs from my mother about misunderstanding and how I was tearing the family apart. Accusatory texts from Chloe, calling me a monster for trying to steal her inheritance. A single, pathetic text from my dad, "Please call us, Amelia. We can sort this out." By midnight, I checked my call log. 74 missed calls, a new record. Then a final text message from my mother came through. It was different from the others. The anger and panic were gone, replaced by a chillingly simple demand. It contained just 5 words, all in capitals: "We need to talk." I looked at the message, a small, humorless smile on my face. Yes, we did. But this time, we would be talking on my terms. I finally typed out a reply, the first communication I had sent them since the trap was sprung. My message was just as simple as hers. "I agree. My lawyer will be in touch to schedule a meeting." The meeting took place a week later in a sterile, impersonal conference room at my lawyer's downtown office. The air was thick with a tension that felt heavy enough to suffocate. My parents and Chloe sat on one side of the polished mahogany table, a united front of simmering resentment. They looked smaller and older than I remembered, their vacation tans faded, replaced by the pallor of stress. My mother's eyes were red-rimmed, my father's face was a stony mask of denial, and Chloe vibrated with a barely concealed rage, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. I sat opposite them with M. "Why lawyer, Ms. Davies?" by my side. I was calm, my hands resting on a single folder in front of me. I had worn my promotion suit, the same one I'd worn at the ceremony. It felt like armor. My mother, predictably, spoke first, her voice quivering with theatrical emotion. "Amelia, I don't understand how you could do this to us, to your own family, after everything we've done for you." "Everything you've done for me?" I replied, my voice devoid of the emotion she was expecting. "Or everything I've done for you?" I slid the folder across the table. It was a printed, bound copy of the Jensen family audit. "I believe you've already received the digital version, but I thought a hard copy would be useful. It documents, with bank statements and receipts, $287,000 that I have given you over the past 10 years under false pretenses." My father finally spoke, his voice a low rumble. "That was your choice, Amelia. You offered. We're a family. We help each other." "Helping is one thing, Dad," I said, meeting his gaze directly. "A systematic, long-term pattern of financial exploitation is another. You told me you needed $10,000 for a leaky roof, but there was no leak. The money was for a cruise you took on the same day you promised to be at my promotion ceremony. You told me you needed $25,000 for a down payment on your condo because you were selling my childhood home. But you didn't sell it. You transferred it into a trust for Chloe's exclusive benefit, effectively disinheriting me while using my own money to do it." A choked sob escaped my mother. Chloe finally erupted. "You're just jealous," she spat, her face contorted with fury. "You've always been jealous of me. You have your big, important career, and I have nothing. The house is the only thing I'll ever have." "You have nothing, Chloe?" I asked, my voice dangerously quiet. "Let's look at the receipts, the trips to Europe for inspiration, the spa retreats, the designer clothes, the apartment you live in. Who do you think paid for all of that?" "It wasn't your gallery assistant salary. It was my 60-hour work weeks. It was my bonuses. It was the life I sacrificed so you could find yourself without any real-world consequences." Silence descended on the room. They had no defense against the cold, hard facts. They had operated in a world of emotional manipulation and vague promises for so long, they were unprepared for the brutal clarity of a spreadsheet. Ms. Davies chose that moment to step in, her voice crisp and professional. "My client is not here to debate the past," she said, addressing my parents. "She is here to discuss the terms of the legally binding contract you signed. The debt is acknowledged. The liens on your properties are in the process of being filed. What we are here to discuss is the repayment plan." She laid out the terms I had decided on. They were non-negotiable. A portion of their retirement income would be garnished monthly. The home equity line of credit they had taken out on the family home would be used to pay back a lump sum immediately. The trust would be amended to name me as a 50% beneficiary, or it would be dissolved and the asset liquidated to cover the remaining debt. My relationship with them, I stated personally, was contingent on two things: full compliance with the financial agreement and their joint participation in family therapy to address their toxic dynamic. I told them I didn't expect they would choose the latter. The fight went out of them then. They saw that I was no longer the daughter they could guilt or bully into submission. I was a stranger at a negotiating table, holding all the cards. Defeated, they agreed to the terms. Over the next few months, the legal agreements were finalized. The first repayment transfer appeared in my bank account. It wasn't about the money anymore. It was about the principal. It was the first installment on a debt that was more than financial. 6 months later, I was packing up the last of my boxes in my apartment. My flight to Singapore was in 2 days. I hadn't spoken to my family directly since that day in the conference room. All communication went through our lawyers. They had not started therapy. Chloe had sent a few hateful emails, which I deleted without reading. The silence from them was profound. I had excised the source of the rot in my life, and what was left was peace. I looked around the empty apartment that had been my sanctuary and my prison. It no longer felt like home. Home was a concept I was now free to define for myself. My phone buzzed with a message from a new group chat, the Singapore Trailblazers, my new team. They were asking about my flight details, excited for my arrival. I smiled, a genuine, unburdened smile. I had found my real family, a family forged in mutual respect and shared goals, not in obligation and deceit. My promotion plaque was wrapped carefully in bubble WR. App ready to be packed. It no longer represented a hollow victory. It was a symbol of my liberation. The empty chairs at the ceremony had been a gift. They had forced me to see the truth I had been avoiding for years. My family's betrayal didn't break me. It promoted me. It promoted me from the role of the dutiful daughter to the CEO of my own life. And as I sealed the final box, I knew with absolute certainty that my future was a story I would write entirely on my own.